I grew up in a small Midwestern town, the kind where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest building was our old high school. The place had been standing for nearly a century, most of it renovated, except for one wing, the East Hall. The East Hall was the oldest part of the school, closed off for decades. The paint on the doors was cracked, the windows were cloudy with dust, and the air smelled like mildew and something faintly metallic. Most people assumed it was just because the heating never worked over there. But students talked about it differently. They said the East Hall was haunted, not in the silly Halloween kind of way, but in the something happened here that the adults won't talk about kind of way. My senior year, I had to stay late for yearbook club. It was June, the start of summer break, and the building was practically empty by 7 p.m. I was walking toward the front doors when I noticed something strange down at the far end of the East Hall. Through the glass door, I could see a single classroom light flickering on and off. The problem was that whole wing had no power. At first, I thought maybe it was the janitor, but when I looked closer, I saw the light wasn't just flickering. It was pulsing, like a heartbeat. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped into the East Hall. The temperature dropped immediately. My sneakers echoed against the old wooden floorboards. The smell was stronger here, musty and metallic, like rust and old pennies. Room 104 was halfway down the hall. Its window was glowing with that strange, pulsing light. As I got closer, I noticed the classroom door was slightly open. I could hear something faint whispering. Not the kind of whisper where you can make out words, but more like the sound of breath brushing past your ear. I slowly pushed the door open. The light inside wasn't coming from a bulb. It was coming from the middle of the room, where an old, rusted desk sat by itself. Inside the desk's open drawer was a single dim lantern, flickering like a candle. And then I realized someone was sitting in the teacher's chair. It was a girl, pale skin, long black hair hanging over her face. She was wearing an old-fashioned school uniform, one I had only seen in black and white photos in the school's archives. Her hands were folded neatly on the desk. She didn't look up. She didn't move. I took a step back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The whispering grew louder, and that's when I noticed it wasn't coming from her. It was coming from everywhere else in the room. Voices overlapping, hissing, murmuring my name. I turned and bolted for the hallway. As I reached the glass door, I looked back one last time. The girl was standing now. Her face was pressed against the window of room 104, her hair still covering her eyes. Her hands were flat on the glass, and even though the hallway was silent, I swear I could still hear her whisper, "Don't leave me here alone." I never told anyone. The next morning, I walked past the East Hall, and the glass door was chained shut, but the light in room 104 was still pulsing. It was the last week of summer before school let out. The hallways were hot, the air heavy with the smell of sweat and the faint stench of the old pipes in the science wing. Everyone was counting down the hours to vacation until Mrs. Callahan didn't show up for class. She'd been our English teacher for years, the kind of woman who remembered your birthday and asked about your parents. But that Tuesday morning, instead of her, there was a substitute. He was tall, too tall for the small classroom, wearing a suit that looked like it belonged in the 1970s. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, they didn't blink much. He introduced himself in a voice that was too low, almost like it was straining to sound human. "I'll be filling in for Mrs. Callahan." The thing was, nobody had told us she'd be absent. From the start, he acted strange. He never looked at the clock. He didn't follow the lesson plan. Instead, he asked us questions like, "Do you ever dream of drowning?" Or, "If you had to choose, would you burn or freeze?" When someone tried to laugh it off, his head would snap toward them so fast, the room went silent. By the second day, we started noticing little things. His shoes never made a sound on the tile floor. His shadow didn't match his movements. And once, when the sunlight hit his face through the blinds, his expression flickered, just for a split second, like his skin didn't quite fit right. That Friday, I stayed late to grab a book I'd left behind. The halls were empty, the only sound the faint hum of the old lights. As I passed our classroom, I saw him inside. Only, he wasn't alone. Mrs. Callahan was there, standing in the corner, eyes wide, mouth gagged with a strip of cloth. Her wrists were tied to the radiator. The substitute turned toward me, but his body didn't move, only his head, twisting in a slow, unnatural way. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing," he whispered. My heart was pounding as I ran to the principal's office, but when I dragged them back, the room was empty. No Mrs. Callahan, no substitute. The school called the police, but there was no record of anyone being hired to replace her that week. Mrs. Callahan returned the following Monday, pale and shaky, saying only that she'd been sick. When I looked at her, I noticed something strange. She didn't blink much anymore, and when she called my name during roll call, her voice was just a little too low. In my sophomore year, our high school started renovations on the gym building. That meant all the students had to use the older, unused locker room in the basement, a place most of us didn't even know existed. The basement had low ceilings, buzzing fluorescent lights, and smelled faintly of chlorine from the long-abandoned swimming pool down the hall. The lockers were small, dented, and painted a sickly shade of green that had chipped away over decades. The first day we used it, I got assigned locker number 38. It was wedged between two others so tightly it barely opened. I pulled on the handle, expecting it to be empty like the rest. But inside, there was a pair of shoes. Not just any shoes, they were old. Leather gym shoes, the kind they used back in the 1960s. The soles were cracked, and the laces were stiff, coated with a layer of gray dust. I figured someone had left them there years ago, so I tossed them on the bench and started loading my stuff. That's when I noticed something odd. The shoes were warm. That didn't make sense. The basement was freezing. I ignored it, locked up, and went to gym class. When I came back an hour later, The shoes were gone. At first, I thought someone had taken them, but then I looked inside my locker. My belongings were shoved to the side, and there they were again, the same leather shoes, this time neatly placed on top of my clothes. I left them there, not wanting to touch them again. Over the next few days, weird things started happening. My lock would be open when I came back. My clothes would be rearranged. Once, I found a folded piece of paper stuffed into my sneakers. It just said, "Don't take my place." One Friday after practice, I stayed late to finish some laps. By the time I got back to the locker room, the place was empty. As I walked down the row toward my locker, I heard the faint squeak of sneakers on the tile floor behind me. I turned. No one was there. Then, the locker next to mine slammed shut so hard it echoed. The shoes were now on the bench in front of me, perfectly lined up, and wet as if someone had just walked in from the rain. I backed away toward the exit, but the sound of footsteps started again. Closer this time. When I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him. A boy, maybe 17, wearing an old gym uniform, his skin pale and damp, like he'd just climbed out of the pool. His eyes were hollow, and his lips were moving, but no sound came out. I bolted up the stairs, not looking back. The next Monday, the principal announced the basement locker rooms were closed for safety inspections. But when I walked past the stairwell, I could see down into the darkness, and there, at the bottom of the steps, sat the same pair of leather shoes, pointed toward me. Every school has a place students aren't allowed to go. At my high school, it was the old storage room at the end of the west wing. The door was always locked, the windows painted over, and no one ever talked about it. One summer afternoon, during a heat wave, the AC broke, so they let us out of class early. My friend Tyler dared me to sneak into the west wing with him. The hallway felt cooler. They're almost damp, and the air smelled faintly of mold and dust. When we reached the storage room door, Tyler pulled a bent paperclip from his pocket. He'd been planning this. It only took a few seconds before the lock clicked. Inside, it was dark. Dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. Old desks, broken chalkboards, and stacked boxes filled the room. Then we noticed carvings on the wall, deep scratches like fingernail marks running down the paint. Some were fresh enough that bits of white plaster flaked onto the floor. Tyler tried to laugh it off, but the sound died when we heard something from the back of the room. Not footsteps, breathing. Slow, heavy breathing, like someone was trying to stay quiet. We both froze, staring into the dark corner behind a stack of chairs. The breathing stopped. Then, from the shadows, something shifted, a pale hand gripping the edge of a desk. We bolted, slamming the door behind us. The lock clicked on its own. Later, when we worked up the courage to tell the janitor, he went pale and muttered, "That room's been sealed since the accident. Don't go near it again." We never found out what accident he meant, but sometimes when I walk past that wing, I swear I hear faint breathing on the other side of the door.